Tim Baker, good to have you back on the show.
Good to be back. How's it going, Tim?
It's going well. Valentine's Day right around the corner, and so it's only fitting that we talk about love and money. And let me just start, Tim, before we get into the weeds on this, that we are coming from our experience and perspective. And of course, we're going to talk about a broader perspective, hopefully, and different options that people can consider as they're working with a significant other, spouse, or partner to manage their finances. But inevitably, we have a bias of what has worked for us, right? For Jess and I, and for you and Shay. And so we're going to try to broaden that perspective, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that right up front and that there is no one right way when it comes to managing your finances with a partner, significant other, or spouse. And Tim, I want to start by getting your take on a poll I recently posted on LinkedIn. And I asked the following question: for those that are working with someone else on their finances, which of the following best describes your situation? Is everything merged? Are some things merged, some things separate, or is everything separate? And about half people said everything was merged. 40% said some merged, some separate, and about 10% responded that nothing was merged and everything was just separate. What are your thoughts on that? Does that match with what you hear typically from clients and prospects?
I actually think that the the half of everything merged seems really high to me.
Hmm.
Like I didn't expect that at all. And I think the 10%, where nothing is merged seems pretty low to me.
Interesting.
I thought that we would see more of an like not an even distribution, but um, the all merged is something I don't want to say I rarely come across, but like I feel like the most common is some merged, some separate,
Mm-hmm.
in my experience. So I was a little bit surprised when I saw that poll, that was the outcome, because again, I think most, and I think a lot of like our culture and just how we operate these days affects this, right? Like we're
Yeah.
getting married later.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've talked about my wife being Brazilian. Like in her culture, you live at home until you get married, and I know that some people here in the United States do that too, right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think some of like what's going on with our socioeconomics, like it's has changed this, but I think by and large, I probably see more of a hybrid model, which I think we'll talk about here in this episode.
Yeah, I think your point about timeline of when people get married or when they have a significant other spouse and that shifting is significant. Again, speaking from my perspective or Jess and I, we got married relatively young, 24. And so neither of us had really a strong process of our own. Right. So it kind of made sense. And we're in, I guess, what you're calling kind of that rare small group where everything is merged. But that would have been very different, I think, if we got married at 30 or 35. Right. And we were doing things on our own for a while.
Yeah, I think and then I also like divorce, right? Too, if you've
Yeah.
experienced that, like your especially if there's money things that have come out, like so I think if people have been in serious relationships and then are not, and then are in another serious relationship later, like I think, or I know divorce can be traumatic, or just trauma with finances growing up. I know you got one, just like things with your family business and things like that.
Hmm.
I think this all paints part of how we look at this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know there's some people that have gone through, relationships. It's like, I'll never merge again, our finances. Like it has to be separate. Now they're still
Hmm.
working and trying to row the boat in the same direction, so to speak. But there has to be kind of a little bit of a separation for them to feel comfortable. And I understand that. And again, it's not necessarily something that I've had to deal with personally, but
Hmm.
um, I get where that can come from.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is not a scientific Gallup poll, right? This was a
No.
poll I just put out there on LinkedIn. I do think we had, I'll have to go back and look. I think there was 150, 170 people that responded. So it was a sizable group, but certainly not representative of a larger group. Tim, the other thing I wanted to just get your pulse on, because you sit in front of prospective clients every day where you're having conversations in a very intimate way about their finances as they try to discover or learn more about our services, see if they're a good fit. And as a part of that, naturally, you get a inside peek in everything that's going on, financially. And of course, doing that confidentially is you aggregate some of those conversations. What are some of the trends that you are seeing? Is it what one person who's typically initiating this conversation and they're dragging someone along to be there? Is it maybe one person who's making all the decisions and the second person's not there at all? Or do you see more cases where it's really a shared decision-making process, two people present at the table?
Yeah, and again, probably not an even distribution, but all of those things, Tim. Like, I
Mm,
think there's sometimes where, and I think there might be some gender dynamics at play, and I don't want to like, generalize or anything, but like sometimes it's, a lot of pharmacists are female, so it might be like, hey, I've been listening to you since like our P2 year on the podcast, so they feel like they know me or know you,
mhm,
but obviously I'm
mhm.
the one meeting with them. And then they might tell their husband, we'll call husband Brian. They might tell Brian that we're meeting with Tim, like 5 minutes before we actually do, and they don't know who I am from Adam,
Mhm.
right? So, um, there's some people that are both like in it, and most of the time when I ask the question, like, hey, like when you hire a financial planner, like who is the decision maker? Who are the stakeholders? Like the overwhelming answer, it's like it's the two of us, right? We're gonna basically make this decision together.
Mm,
Now, who takes point and who might be our main contact, that can differ. Um, it's really really hard, at least in where with what we do, to work. And this is one of the things that happens a lot. And I'm sometimes unsure how to navigate where, a person will book a meeting. They say that I'm married, but I'm looking for a financial planner just for me. And I
myself,
think
right.
again, we look at the whole picture typically. We're not looking at just like a project here and there. We're looking at a holistic kind of longitudinal relationship. And sometimes it's hard if the partner isn't represented in that. And
Mhm.
I would say at a minimum, like we need to know like what the joint balance sheet is, right? We know that like retirement accounts, they're always individualized. You have an
Mhm.
IRA in your name, Tim, right? There's a 401k in, Shay's name, like that type of
Yeah.
thing. Like those are not joint accounts. Um, but we want the joint, we want the individual and the shared balance sheet there. And then we also want like the shared goals, right? What are we,
Mhm.
and again, you could have a goal of I want to do this and this, and Jess could have a goal, I want to do that
Yeah.
and that. And then we could have shared goals. And I think those have to be in the plan, or we're not really not doing you justice, right? So
Mhm.
all of the things that you mentioned are are present, right? And I try to weed out people that are going to be less engaged because again, like we want people that are engaged that take our advice for the most part. We feel like the advice that we give is in your best interest.
Mhm.
It is the client's financial plan. Um, but both partners are somewhat, plugged into what's going on. But yeah, it can be all over the map, right? And um, it's just interesting to see how people approach. And again, people have, I don't know if we talk about this, but people have different money personalities in terms of how they view money,
Yeah.
how they're raised around money, what is their vocabulary for money, like all that kind of stuff. And again, some of that could just be inherent to how they are. It could be also like the environment in which they grew up in.
Mhm. And I want to start there, Tim, because I think before we talk about strategies or ways that people may think about working on their finances together, I think it's so important that we first just recognize and understand and reflect on how did we grow up around money and what I call kind of know thyself in terms of the money personality. Because when you bring two different money personalities together, right? Even if you end up having accounts that are, let's say, completely separate or some combination of merge or separate, and we'll talk about that in more detail here in a little bit. Inevitably, there's going to be conversations where things start to overlap. You mentioned kind of shared goals and visions. And we all come with different money perspectives that shape our money personalities that we have today. And what I have found, and I'm making this sound much easier than it is for the sake of just the time on the podcast, like Jess and I came from very different money personalities. And it took us a while, I think, to really be able to articulate that out loud and say, "Hey, these are the strengths that I bring to the table growing up in this environment, and these are the weaknesses that I bring to the table growing up in this environment." And I really felt like that took the pressure off some of the conversation that, we can think about, "Hey, because we grew up in this environment and our family maybe budgeted this way, or in my household growing up, everything was merged, and I have vivid memories of how my parents did the budget and the conversations and how the small business was a part of that conversation. Of course, that shaped the perspective that I bring, good and bad, right? Perspective. And so I think I want to get your thoughts on that because my experience, my personal experience says the more we understand how we grew up around money and how that shapes the perspective we have today, the better chance we have to be able to come together and figure out what this plan looks like going forward.
Can I put you on the hot seat, Tim? I'm interested to
Bring
see
it.
like because I view again working with you and Jess in the past, like I view you guys as kind of like similar in terms
Mm,
of like money. What if you don't mind, like walk us through like maybe this will be a good way to kind of talk a little bit about the money personalities and like what those are. But
yeah.
like where do you see you? Because so when I think about money personalities, like the umbrella, and I've talked about this before, is you kind of have that person that is like open hand, like more of the spender,
Mhm.
right? And underneath that, I think that's the spender, the risk taker, and then the other umbrella is the closed hands. So people are just like saving, are afraid to part with their dollars. So that's typically the
Mhm.
security seeker, the saver, and then the person that's kind of in the middle is the flyer, where they're kind of more like laissez faire. Like
Mhm.
money is a thing. Like I don't necessarily worry about it too much. It's very easygoing, and you're kind of like in the middle somewhere, right?
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
walk me through if you don't mind. Like, where would you say you kind of were, and then where Jess was in those in those personalities.
Yeah, and let me reference for people that are interested in learning more about what you're talking about. There's several assessments out there, but what one that matches up with the terms that Tim's using around like saver, spender, flyer, risk taker is called the 5 money personalities quiz, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. I'll say that I think where we have similarities, let's start there, is we both grew up in households where the finances were merged. And we both grew up in households where I would say there was shared decision making, but one person who was clearly taking the lead with the finances. And so that's the similarities I think we're coming with. Um, for better or for worse, I would say I grew up in a household that was very frugal. There was more of a scarcity
Yeah.
mindset around money and very much a focus on saving for the future, trying to do everything that we can to plan and prep for the future. Now, some of that I think comes from growing up in a small business. Like I have vivid memories and conversations that my parents were having. I remember my mom talking about, hey, how hard my dad is working in the business. And, we necessarily can't do A, B, or C because we're trying to save up for this vacation a year or 2 years in the future. I remember my mom talking about, hey, we're able to go on this vacation that we maybe did once a year, once every other year, but it was paid for by coupons and clipping coupons. And I remember mom kind of working the coupons on the
Yeah.
living room floor, right? So those are core memories. I think of Inside Out, right? Core memories. Like, and I have carried those very much in to the way I have approached money for better or for worse. I think the frugality has real benefits, but I have really struggled and have had to work hard to evolve and have had to have your help and the planning team's help and Jess's help to really get out of that future only mindset and that scarcity frugality mindset to loosen the reins and ask some of the questions of like, what's the so what of today? And how do we find this balance, right? Of living the rich life today and in the future. And I think on the flip side, Jess, I would say grew up in a family environment where there was some stress and fear and anxiety around the money, but I think there was more of an openness to the present moment and some of the experiences that are in front of us today. But on the flip side, there was some of that scarcity mindset towards the future as well. But there was definitely more of a present that I think she really brings that perspective today, where I'm kind of balancing us out to think about tomorrow. She's really helping us focus in the present.
Yeah, and I think I think sometimes I think people think that like if you have multiple personalities in a planning relationship, like so if you think about the security seeker, someone who values stability, planning, long-term financial security, and the
Hmm.
saver, they have satisfaction saving money and minimize the expenses. Like that end of the spectrum, I think goes a long way in a financial plan. But I think it's good to be counterbalanced by a spender,
Yep.
someone who views money as a tool for enjoyment, convenience, maybe some immediate gratification, YOLO. I've kind of talked about this with my own journey. Like I've kind of
Hmm.
gone back and forth on this. Risk taker, right? That might be someone because again, like it's funny you say that because like growing up in my household, like if you ran a business, like you're a risk taker. If you're an entrepreneur, you're a risk
Hmm.
taker, right? And maybe not so much, right? So risk taker thrives on opportunity,
It's interesting.
adventure. and potential for big financial rewards. And again, that flyers, money's not a central focus. They prioritize other values like relationships or passions.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's good to have. I think if you have all of one thing, if you have two savers or two people security seeker, you're amassing a fortune, hopefully, but for the purpose of what, right? If you have someone that again opens the hand, is spending or taking, big swings and risking it all, you know, we want to avoid having to like bag groceries in the
Mhm.
future. So I think having that balance in a relationship is good. And I think
Yeah.
this changes over time. Like I mentioned, you know, I grew up and again, my mom was a teacher, my dad made similar money. We were fine, right? But like my mom did the coupon thing and we scrimped and we saved. And when if we did go out, it was, we'd order a meal,
No
no,
drinks.
no drinks, no
That's right.
desserts, right? Um, so like, and they put a lot of their money into the house and like where our
Mhm.
family spend time. And, growing up, I was in charge of like, you get to a certain age, I was working like in Russia. I was never allowed to work on a school night. So I'd work on the weekends. I
Mm.
worked at an Irish restaurant where I grew up. But it was like, hey, if you want to buy a car, like that's on you, pal. Like if you want
Same.
insurance or gas, if you want certain items, that's on you. So I kind of, fell in line with my mom, who was a saver. But then when I went into the army and 9/11 happened, and it was kind of like YOLO, right? Like
Mm.
it was, I don't really know if tomorrow is going to happen. So like that shaped more where I was more of a spender, right? And then I think I got positives and negatives from both things, and
Mhm.
and I'm kind of at where I am now, which is probably somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't say I'm a flyer because I kind of think of that as more maybe like off, but I would say I look more to the long term. And
Mhm.
Shay, as I've said on this, is more like, bro, we have kids, like
This is the
we have
season.
one, yeah, this is
Mhm.
the season. We have one shot at this life. And I've kind of come around to that too, because, I do think that because we're planning and we're doing the things that we do, and again, the numbers are um confirmed by our plan, like I feel more at ease and more
Mhm.
um comfortable spending money, like especially if it's for those things that you know um are for our family and experiences and things like that. But this is a hard thing too, and I like, so we talk about the personalities. I don't know if a lot of us just have the vocabulary
Right.
ourselves to have the conversations with ourselves about money versus having it with a person, that you're in a relationship with. Like we don't have the vocabulary ourselves. So how can we expect, especially if we come from different places, to
Mhm.
be able to, have the conversation, have the vocabulary or ask the right questions? Because again, like, growing up, like money was kind of a taboo thing. Like I never talked to my parents about how much money they made or how we never really talked. I know we would save and I think we knew that money was a scarce thing, but like we didn't really talk openly about it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, the not having those conversations is a big deal too. So I think that's why this is really important. This topic is really important. And it's apropos we're doing this around, Valentine's Day, is because it's difficult for ourselves, let alone introducing a completely, new set of beliefs and that type of thing.
Mhm. So first of all, I need you to stop hating on people that are bagging groceries because that was my first job
Oh,
and
sorry.
my favorite job.
Really?
I loved it. I loved it. Like every time I go to the grocery store, I get the warm and fuzzy still. Like I don't know,
Really?
there's just something about like the methodical nature of it, and I felt like it taught me a ton around communication skills, dealing with people like my mom that show up with their box of coupons, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is gonna take forever, right? Not now you just
Yeah.
scan like an app and it has all your coupons clipped or
Yeah.
whatever, but,
Yeah.
um, I loved it, and I'll give my boys a hard time every once in a while. I'll throw out a produce code off the top of my memory. It's great.
No way.
Presses them every time. Yeah, it's awesome. Well, it
That's
used to
interesting.
impress them. They're getting too old for it now.
So did you
But
like it because it was kind of like Tetris too, like bagging
oh, yeah.
groceries?
Like,
Okay.
I can't stand how kids these days, right? Bag
Yeah.
groceries. Like,
Yeah.
so inefficient, but
Oh man, maybe we need to get you back. I mean, the whole point of financial plan is hopefully to have to avoid that, Tim, so you don't have
I
to
enjoyed it.
moonlight.
I
But
did.
maybe, hey, but maybe no hate. Maybe that's a
Yeah,
good kind of sunset job. I mean, I could see that being a cool job, especially you're talking to people. I'm no hate on
I
my
liked
on
it.
my end. Yeah.
So fun fact for the YFP community, my IPMs, which is the items per minute. That's the KPI for the cashiers. My IPMs were top at the top supermarket in Western New York. So fun fact.
Whoa, that's
Um,
quite the flex.
but I think your point about emotional vocabulary is so important, right? Because my experience, Tim, tells me that when the emotional vocabulary isn't there, to be able to first identify yourself, where do some of these money scripts come from, to then be able to initiate a conversation. This comes out sideways, right? And I can think about some early experiences in our marriage where, might lead to passive aggressiveness or, internalizing some of what really is underneath that, which is the scarcity or the fear or the other things that has nothing or almost nothing to do with what actually is being spent, but it's activating an emotion that may be related to how we were brought up financially, and being able to put a name to that, I think, is so important. So let's shift gears. We talked at the beginning about in terms of managing, practically managing accounts and month-to-month finances, whether it's credit cards, checking accounts. Some partners, some couples decide to have everything separate. Some decide to merge everything, and then others do a little bit of both. And from a high level, what do you see as the pros and cons to those approaches? And functionally, like, what does that potentially look like? And I'm specifically thinking about the group that maybe you said is probably the largest group that has some merged and some separate. How does that practically work?
Yeah, so we divide these into 3 groups. We'll kinda go through the completely merged, the completely
Mhm.
separate, and then the hybrid. So, I think if we look at the completely merged, I think some of the pros for that group is simplicity and transparency, right? You know when one hand is washing the other type of thing. So you're managing one set of accounts to track expenses. It makes budgeting and saving a lot easier. I think full visibility can foster trust and reduce the chances of surprises. I think it's easier to kind of align your financial goals, so it encourages more of a teamwork approach. Whether it's a big goal or even something that's less so.
Mhm.
I think it promotes regular conversations like, "Hey, can you transfer that?" Or can you make sure that the money's there because this bill's coming out? And it helps partners are on the same page. Um, I think it increases efficiency in money management. I know one of the things I was jealous about that you said where you're taking a lot of those like um, expenses that you always have. We have to buy paper towels every 3 months or whatever, and you're like automating that with like Amazon or whatever it is.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
in my household, I couldn't really do that because kind of Shay takes care of that, so it's kind of out of
Mm,
sight, out of mind for me, right?
mhm.
Um, it could be with managing debt. If you're again everything is if you have a shared credit card that kind of got out of whack, you're seeing it together. Um, and even investments. Again, most of retirement accounts are separate, but
Right.
you can have joint investments. I think it helps streamline things like the redheaded stepchild of the financial plan, estate planning, that people not often forget about. If a partner becomes incapacitated, it's
Mhm.
easier to find stuff. Um, and I think just easier during like life transition. So again, in the case of an emergency, a death, hopefully not, the surviving partner has immediate access to all funds without any legal hurdles. I think the cons here are, and I think this is probably the big thing, is like loss of financial autonomy.
Mm,
So
mhm.
where, like, hey, I was a grown up, I got my big boy job, big girl job, I've been kind of living on my own, and all of a sudden, I'm getting married, and you want me to like combine everything, like that does it feels restrictive. I don't like
Mhm.
that. I feel controlled, and that can lead to conflicts in spending habits and things like that. I think it could be potential for like power imbalances is like if one partner earns significantly
Yes.
more and everything is joint, they might feel entitled to have more control or the tiebreaker, and that could create tension. I've definitely seen this where the lower earning partner might feel guilty about
Yeah.
spending, so they themselves don't feel like they're on the same level because they feel like that what they're bringing to the table is not equitable.
Mhm.
Um, could be conflicts over spending priorities. So just, the spender versus the saver can lead to frequent disagreements where, if you have kind of your separate playgrounds, your separate accounts, that maybe that's less so. And then complications again in case of divorce or separation,
Mhm.
um, you know, things like that, and there's probably risk there too. Like if one partner is less financially responsible, their actions can negatively impact both partners' credit scores and financial stability. So
If
that's
they're merged,
probably,
right?
yeah, if they're
Mhm,
merged. So
mhm.
that would probably be the pros and cons for the merge. If they're separate, the pros for it being separate is I think you maintain that financial independence that a lot of people kind of establish for a number of years, maybe before they get married. Like you said, you and Jess were really young when you got married,
Mhm.
right? I was older. It simplifies personal spending. So I think like if you have hobbies or gifts, or I just want to spontaneously buy Shay a gift, I don't want her to see that
Right,
on a credit
right.
card statement. I feel like this happens for us at like Christmas where I'm like, I'll see something on Amazon, but she sees everything that we buy.
Yeah,
So it's like
yeah.
there's no surprise. So I'll just say like, don't don't look
You
at the
you
Amazon
gotta go
cart.
take cash out, although that
Yeah,
doesn't help you
yeah,
on
exactly.
Amazon.
Yeah. It's just like, why are you taking cash out? Like what are you buying? Um,
All your
it could
poker
potentially
winnings. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, those are few and far between. It can reduce those power imbalances, so you're avoiding situation where one partner feels
yeah.
dominant. Um, Easier in the case of divorce or separation. Again, we don't plan for that, and again, potentially protects against financial mismanagement. I know we've had people that we've worked with. Shay has experienced this. I had to a degree where a partner runs up a huge credit card bill, and if you're on that account, like you're on the hook.
Yep.
Um, so cons for completely separation is increased complexity with managing shared expenses, right? So there's more coordination when you're splitting household bills, who pays for what. Some people, and they can do this in either scenario, but you have some people that will live off of one income and everything the
Mhm.
other income is cream. So that doesn't matter, but like it could be there. There could be potential secrecy and mistrust. Like, sometimes we get scared of something that we don't understand or see. So, that could be there. I think it takes more of a lift to have alignment in financial goals. It could be inequity in kind of the lifestyle contributions of like how are we doing this? Because again, in this model, a lot of it is completely separate. So like if I'm just paying for the electric bill, but you're paying for the mortgage, like how does
How do we
that
work that
feel?
out? Yeah,
Yeah, and more
yeah.
complicated in emergencies, that type of thing. So that would be the second bucket. And then probably the most common that I see is kind of some merge, some separate. So the pro here is you kind of get the best of both worlds. You have some financial independence with the benefits of shared financial management. Couples can maintain autonomy over personal spending while working together on joint goals. So you kind of have, the Venn diagram, so to speak. You have,
Yeah.
and I think for the most part, the Venn diagram, that shared shaded area should be the biggest, and then you have like the outlier of kind of your own maybe accounts. Simplified shared expenses encourages healthy communication, so couples still need to discuss and agree on contributions. Um, Promotes transparency, but also allows you to have a little bit of space. Reduce financial stress. I think the cons here is, again, you still have that potential for financial imbalance. There's still complexity in the money management if you're, again, managing multiple accounts. I think that you still have a risk of, what's yours versus ours, and then how does
Right.
that create a space or an arm's length in your marriage. And then I think less financial, visibility and things like that. I think regardless of approach, no matter where and I think more so than others, like it's clear communication, right?
Mhm.
So sometimes you're clearly communicating by default. So if I have everything's like Shay can see, she knows that I just spend $100 on a bottle of brown, right? And she's like, dude, what the heck?
She's used to it by now.
She's used to it. So I think clear communication regardless. I think regular check-ins,
Yeah.
scheduling periodic financial discussions. Again, sometimes that's with the help of financial planner. I also think that you doing that as a couple is really important. I
Mhm.
think clear agreements and setting expectations of how things are going to be split or whatever that looks like can prevent conflicts. I kind of think of our partnership charter like, hey, if these
Mhm.
things happen, this is what we're going to do. I think those are important. And then just being flexible. I think the key to any financial plan is not to, nothing is poured in concrete,
Yep.
right? We need to have flexibility because things change, life changes, right? And it is, I'm sure the listeners have heard me say this. It's about planning. So that's for you, Corey, planning with an ing, not the plan, right? Like, because the plan, once we have it, something happens in the world and, the plan goes out the
Yeah.
door. So it's about It's about the process of planning.
Tim, communication, and we're going to come back to talking about the value of a third party. I know it's something Jess and I have benefited from tremendously. And so we'll talk about what the role is. But in terms of couples and communication, whether you've been married for 20 years, whether you're been together for 10 and you're not married, whether you're, just started dating, I think there's a space for some of these conversations, regardless of your situation. And we compiled a list of 25 financial discussions for couples. If people want to download that guide, yourfinancialpharmacist.com/, 25. And I often joke with people like, hey, this is a third party list, right? So if you're wanting to start some of these conversations, it's not me coming with the ammo. It's the, hey, I read about this. I heard about this on a podcast. We should have these conversations, which,
Yeah.
jokingly, but I think that speaks to some of the value of the third party. Hey, give me a visual on the Venn diagram, because I do think for a lot of people that resonates. You talked about some merge, some separate, and in your opinion, you want to see that center part to be the largest part, knowing everyone's situation is different. So, that might be something like 70% merge, 15-15, 60-20-20, right? Something along those lines. But there's of course variations of that. Like it is all the money coming into the central and then we're dividing the percentages, or are we weighting it, according to what we make? So, if we're both contributing toward the mortgage payment, but one person makes 70% of the household income, are we contributing equally, or is it weighted? Any more details you can share on that of what you've seen people do?
What I think is best is everything comes into a joint account. So
Okay.
like all of the paychecks come into a joint account. And then I think if you do have like separate accounts, some dollar amount or some percentage of that can, go to an individual account for you to do whatever you want with, right? I think what most people do, because again, I think it's the inertia of this is here. It's like I think what most people do is they get paid into their normal accounts and then they feed into a joint account. That's
A
what Shay and
joint.
I do. And I
Yeah.
have always kind of complained about that. And I think it got to a point because again, she's experienced things in her own life that I think, we are a team and I have but like I think it's just more of a comfort thing for her. Um, but I don't even know what the percentage, essentially the way we do. And we kind of follow the no budget and like we look at all of our expenses and basically she she's the tracker. I'm the financial planner, but she actually does all this. Like, so she has a spreadsheet that she says, okay, Zoe's now on daycare. That's costing us $1 million
Mm.
a week. We have this project coming up or whatever. And she basically says, this is how much money you need to put in every paycheck. Right. And then I always push the envelope with like, okay, what are we saving for
Mm.
vacations? What are we saving for retirement? Like that's my role in all of this. So she kind of does the kind of like what is it to run the household, and then we kind of talk about our goals or our major projects, and I kind of shared with you how we kind of get
Yeah, it's
the
cool.
priority of things, and then that's what we essentially do, right?
Mhm.
So that works for us. Again, I think if it were up to me, I would be more of a hey into the joint and then maybe some money out to an individual. The percentages again vary widely,
Yeah.
but I think that for us it works because again it allows me to kind of do some things that of interest that I know she would roll her eyes at. And I'm just like, and she's like, kind of not absent from that, but I look at it as long as we're taking care of those short and medium term goals in terms of how we operate the household. And then I know that, hey, we're maxing out retirement. That's not even
Yeah.
hitting the paycheck, or we're maxing out an HSA or an IRA. Like as long as, and we're funding, that trip that we're going on next. And we calculated that's going to be X amount of dollars. Um, and typically what we just do is we just say, hey, this is what we're paying on, spending on vacations. We divide that by 12
Mhm.
or 24. We put that number in. And then the following year, we just kind of check in and be like, hey, we had to like reach into our pocket a little bit more because Mickey Mouse is super expensive or not. Typically for things like that, we're
Mhm.
continuing to push the envelope in terms of what we are saving. So having those sinking funds. And sometimes we'll have to, they're not necessarily emergencies, but maybe we'll move some money around in our sinking funds that makes sense. So that's kind of what we do. I think a lot of clients, they do some version of that, and especially the hybrid clients where it's mainly like we have separate accounts and we put X amount of
Yeah.
dollars in, and that's how we spend our bills. but I think there's levels to this in terms of like what's comfortable. Again, like I feel like if I had my druthers, like I would just have everything joint, kind of like you and Jess. But again, it's a little bit different dynamic, I think, in terms of
Totally.
where we come from.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanna make sure I recap to understand, and so our audience can understand as well. So you guys have, paychecks coming to individual accounts, then you fund through Shay's kinda monthly process and tracking, you fund the joint account. Shay's kind of boots on the ground, month to month tracking. What do we need to be doing short term? And then together you're working on some of the prioritization of the goals, and then you're pushing some of the conversation of the long term. Am I
Yeah,
tracking? Okay,
correct.
cool. And there's something there that you said, I want to make sure we don't brush by, that is so important, where I see a lot of stress and anxiety and frustration and arguments coming in, is in the absence of understanding what those goals are, long term, short term, midterm, and whether or not we're on track to achieve those. That to me becomes a space where things get dynamic, to say the least, right? Because when you talk about like, hey, we're going to see Mickey Mouse and we're planning for A, B, or C, and we've got a bucket and it's the Mickey Mouse bucket and we're planning for it, or longer term things like retirement, or in days gone by, you guys were buying the RV, right? Whatever are those shared goals, if you know what they are and whether or not you're on track or on progress for them, to me, that just alleviates so much of the financial stress and pressure that can come.
Yeah.
It's in the absence of knowing that where I think that uncertainty causes the anxiety and the feelings of overwhelm that can be the divide to getting on the same page.
Yeah, like I always joke around that, Shay is definitely more of, and again, like I think culturally, like the idea of saving for retirement is very foreign to her because in Brazil, you kind of just work and then you have a pension. Like it's very
Yeah.
different. So, like, trying to get her on board with that has been harder. And again, she looks at our young family and she knows that the time is now to really um enjoy them and the experiences.
Mhm.
And I keep joking around with her because I'm like, one day you're going to get to a certain age where you can start to see retirement and you're going to say, oh, like, Tim, you're so wise for, basically, getting me to put, max out my 401k or whatever it is.
Words that
Like,
will not come out of Shay's mouth,
it
I
will
can
never
assure
come out
you
of her
that.
mouth, but she will eventually wake up one day and might think that, so, um, but I take solace in the fact that, again, knowing the plan and knowing, like, most people you ask, like, "Are you on track for retirement?" They're like, "I don't know." Like,
I have
there's a
no idea.
calculator when I sign into my 401k that tells me, which I think is very, like, irresponsible if I can throw that out there because, like, you know, Shay, like, going through, I'm sharing all, like, the emotional conversations but, like, Zoe, our youngest, is 10 months old, and she just started going to daycare. We had a live-in nanny, an au pair, and it finally got to the point where we did this didn't work out. So we've gone through this emotional thing of like transitioning Zoe to daycare, and that invites an extra expense and
Mhm.
sickness and all this stuff, right? And the emotional sides of that.
Mm.
And Shay will exasperate it through this process, like, oh, I wish I could just stay home and like just be with my baby. And I'm like, well, you can. It just means that we have to like make changes. Like we have to
Mhm.
tighten the belt a lot. And it's the same thing with retirement. Like you can a lot of us, if we're living off of beans and rice and our living expenses are low, like you can retire, right? It's just maybe not a like the lifestyle that you are.
What you thought,
But
yeah.
I think like
Mhm.
I know that we are like I know being more the long-term planner, like that we're doing well, right?
Mhm.
And that's not to say it's always going to be like that because things come in cycles and jobs changes and things like that. But where we're at and what we're doing, I feel really comfortable. And to be honest, like the rest of it, it really doesn't matter where it goes. Like we want to, we have the same values of we want to spend it on our family, or right now it's on our house. Um, so like I don't think twice about that because I trust in the plan. I trust the
Mhm.
process to take that adage. And if I didn't though, it's the same thing when we talk about like student loans or retirement plan. And like, unless you have the math, like you have emotions related to money, but unless you have the math to confirm or deny that, you're kind of flying blind, right? So
Yeah.
like, I have the math and I know that what we're doing is going to set us up for the future. So I don't care if we spend money, even though if that's not necessarily my money personality. I don't care if we spend money today. Um, so I think again, it goes back to having a plan and plan in because things consistently change. And if you don't have that, then I think again, a lot of tension and disagreement and I think having these discussions one on one, but I think having them with an objective third party that knows your balance sheet and knows
Mhm.
your goals is very, very powerful. And sometimes I can say speaking to Shay, like, why are you like this? Or why do you think this way? Um, and I'm asking the wrong accusatory question versus somebody that is a professional that can ask
Mhm.
some more neutral sounding questions to kind of get to how does she think about money versus how do I think about money in a non-judgmental way. And again, that goes back to like a lot of us don't have the vocabulary
Yeah.
or know what questions to ask because we're not raised like that and we just don't know.
Let's talk more about that and the value of a third party. I think we're dancing around it, but you're giving a really good example. When we talk about something like nest egg and retirement, and if Jess were here, I think she would say as much that for her, like there's the numbers in the Excel sheet and then there's the reality of the feelings, right? And when retirement is a question mark, is an unknown, is a I never think there's going to be enough, that very much informs how we feel today and how we act, whether or not that's based on reality. And so I think this is one example where having a third party involved can not only take us jointly through an exercise, versus me punching in numbers and saying, hey, look at the sheet, look at the sheet, look at the sheet. Like, let's walk through this together and challenge the assumptions, but then also include the emotional piece of, hey, like I recognize that this says we're on track and perhaps we're even over saving, which is a conversation we've talked about before on the show. All the while, we're feeling the pressure today of, hey, I wish there was some more cash around to experience the things that we want to experience with the boys. Well, maybe there could be, right? Because of what we're doing for the future. So to me, that's just one example. And if you want to piggyback off that or otherwise, where you've seen having a third party, of course, we're biased in what we do in the planning work can be so valuable in helping partners work together.
Yeah, we just signed on a new client recently that, you know, she's been listening to our podcast forever and,
Shout out.
yeah, much love for the support. And the big reason that she finally booked an appointment with us was because she just recently found out that her grandparents are going to be leaving a pretty sizable amount of money to her parents. And she's kind of taking advice from like the family. It's like save, 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 like max out your retirement. And they're feeling the tightness in like the day to day of having young
Mm,
kids and a family and things like that. And she's like, for what? Like so that I can pass on millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars to like what's the like why? Like I don't want to repeat that. Like I want that balance of I want to live a wealthy life today. And she kind of called you out of like, that's kind of what you say, live a wealthy life today, a wealthy life tomorrow. Like there's balance there. So if you're always just living a wealthy life tomorrow, what's the
right.
freaking point, right? What's the point of taking on this debt or earning this income or having a family? Like you want to make sure that,
Hmm.
you got one crack at this. And I think for her, it was like, I'm maxing everything else out. And if I told like if I were to whisper like I'm not going to do this anymore, like her family would think she's crazy. I'm like, well, they don't know you, right? They don't know like it's just like, oh, like, I should pay off my student loans as quick as possible, or I should invest like this. It's kind of that water cooler.
Yeah.
I should claim social security this way, like that water cooler, like that. They don't know your balance sheet. They don't know your goals. They're trying to help you as best they can, but like, that's not advice. So, and we've had clients that have done those things and I'm like, well, maybe we don't need to do that anymore or right now, right? Maybe when we build a plan, we see that there's room there for you to take care of Tim and Jess in 2025 and maybe not so much Tim and Jess in
Yeah.
2065. And
Yeah.
that's okay, right? Um, but I think sometimes having these conversations, whether they're the discovery meetings to see if like we're a good fit from a planner to a client perspective, Or when I used to do what the planning team does a lot better than what I did, like these script your plan meetings where there's a lot of emotion there in both
Mm,
of those meetings, probably more so in the script your plan where we're talking about, asking very pointed questions about like what are the things that matter to you most? And I remember those meetings, there was tears, there was kind of the one partner like craning their neck at their other partner because they're saying something they had no idea that they felt or was
mhm.
a passion of theirs. Um, and I think that goes back to just not having the vocabulary. Or sometimes I always tell the story of when I got out of the army, I was working in a where I was working I worked for Sears Kmart. They had just merged. We're like, we're gonna vie for retail supremacy.
Sears
And I
who?
was like, yeah, exactly. I was like, yeah, we're gonna beat Amazon and Walmart and all that. It's hilarious now. But I had a great interview with them, and it was kind of more operational leadership and what I was experiencing in the army. Um and it was long hours. So I would get up, I would leave my house at 5 o'clock, and I would get there at 5:30. And then I would stay until probably 6:30, drive the 30 minutes home, and it was dark both ways. But I don't ever remember most days, I don't ever remember the drive. It
Mm,
was just like I was on autopilot when I got into my car and then when I, basically parked. And I
mhm.
think a lot of the times that's our life because we get so freaking busy, Tim, that we don't slow down and actually like reflect or ask ourselves these questions. And again, that goes back to if we go back to like the third party, and again, I'm biased, like if we're meeting with you regularly, even if this is annually or semi-annually, obviously we do a lot of work on the front end of a plan. But
Mhm.
even if we're just taking the time twice a year to kind of check in and actually view that dashboard and not just stare out the windshield for 30 minutes, on your commute to and from. I think that action, and doing that with a partner to kind of tie it back to Valentine's Day is really, really powerful. And I think just because of the hustle and bustle and the distractions that we have, with technology or whatever else, it's hard for us to kind of slow down
Slow, yeah.
and say, like, is this really what I want? Shay, is this really what you want? And I think like, one of the things that Shay and I like to do so we do like a monthly date night and then we kind of do ad hoc stuff, but like we'll talk about it's more of like dreams, like where do we want to go next, right? So one of the exercises that we've done is, I'll make a list of all like the projects or things that I want to do. So whether it's buy an RV or redo the kitchen or, redo our backyard. So we kind of have this list and we both basically rank order the list in order, basically what we want the most. And then I basically combine that in a weighted ranking. And then we talk about that.
Do
And
you
that's
do you
kind of
come up
how
with a shared list first, or do you have your own list and then
we come up with a shared list that we're both
okay,
basically ranking. And then
got it.
what some of the things that have come out of that where, one of the things since we moved into our house in 2020, she's like, I hate this chandelier in the front of the house. And I could not care less about it, Tim. It's not something that I even notice. But she's like, I hate it. It's like this crystal thing. It gets dusty and cobwebby. Like I don't like
Just
it.
get it done and let's
And I'm
stop
like, well,
talking
what is
about
it?
it.
What would it cost us just to
Yeah.
kind of get a new fixture and replace? She's like $1,500. I'm like, why are we even wasting any more? And that's probably not the right way to ask it because that sounds accusatory. But I'm like, what can we do just to make this go away? Like, so those kind of get knocked off. But then some of the major projects, like, hey, we're redoing our backyard. Like we both put that at the top of the list, and like that's what we're attacking next, right? So
Awesome.
then the next one, we'll attack next, or maybe we'll do the ranking again.
Mhm.
But I think, like, those are more of, like, the exciting like, nobody wants to talk about well, some people do, but, like, paying off debt is like, yeah, like, it can kinda be a drag, or some of these other more mundane parts of the financial plan. I think, aligning things that and for us, it's like, having a green space that we really want and is inviting that, we see our family, just enjoying was really important. And we're not
Mhm.
going to move because of, where the market is, the interest rates. Like we're going to put the money in the house that we have. And I think we're excited about that. So like those are some of the discussions that we have. And I think, what you do is then you then plug that into a financial planner. And you say, okay, like how can we make this happen?
Mhm.
Where are we pulling this money from? How long is it going to take for us to save? Do we use debt? Do we leverage? What does that look like? So, yeah.
Tim, one thing you said that is so important, and Jess and I experienced this working with you and the rest of the planning team, you said, Is this what we want?" And a question that we have to come back to. And one of the things I love about our process, step one is we get organized. We really can't do anything else until we have a good record and system of, where's everything at? What's the balance sheet? And do we have eyes on everything that's out there? Step two is what's the vision? We call it script your plan. And once we set that vision, which I will go on record by saying most financial planning firms and financial planners are making financial decisions without a vision, and that is
Yeah.
backwards.
And
The
sometimes even
vision
without like a balance sheet, right? Like, oh,
without a balance sheet.
you have a pulse. Let me sell you this insurance product that you
Yes.
don't need. Yeah.
And the vision, I always describe it, the vision should be the window in which you're looking through, and the other side is any financial decision you're making. How are we going to handle, the debt? What are we looking at in terms of investing and saving for the future? Should we buy this investment property? What about this vacation? What about that? Right. And that shared vision, which you talked about, is so important in terms of two people working together. But once we set that vision, this is not the strategic plan at your workplace where it sits on the shelf and becomes dusty. Like this comes back in the meetings to say, hey, Tim and Jess, in 2023 or whatever it was, last time we did this, you guys said that tangibly, these were the things that meant you were living your rich life with your family. Have we done them? Have we
Yeah.
not
You hold
done
the
them?
mirror up, right?
You hold the mirror up.
Yep.
And when we think about how we measure the ROI, right, of the financial plan, I know a topic you're passionate about. Sure,
Sure.
there are X's and O's that we want to look at. We're spending so much investing of time and money working with a financial planner. And what's the potential return on that if we didn't have that relationship? Yes, let's have that conversation. But what is it worth to say this is the vision for rich life and we're actually going to make this happen and tracking whether or not we're achieving that? Like we all know when we look back in 30 or 40 years, that is going to be what matters.
Yeah.
Not did we get our nest egg to 3.9 versus $3.6 million. So that vision and having someone that can facilitate the conversations to get to that vision and then to hold that mirror back up and say, how are we doing? Right? How are
Yeah.
we
I mean,
progressing?
and I think it could be a little bit of tough love, a little bit of the stick of like, hey, and if I'm talking to myself here, it's like, hey, Tim, like nowhere in your script, your plan meeting, your goal session, did you say that you had to lead the league in like bourbon purchases? If that's
Yeah.
important, then like that should be in the financial plan and we should
Hmm.
account for that. But if it's not, then like, what are we doing? I know people can relate to like shop therapy and things like that, that some of that things that goes on there. But, like, most of the time, people are like, "Oh, I have to have, like, I don't have to have these things," but that's what we typically spend. It's empty
Mm.
calories. That's what we spend our dollars on. It's more of the and I'll shout out one of our clients that's been working with us probably since 2018. I talked with her yesterday. Like, one of the big things 2 major things, that we've worked on. So she good amount of credit card debt, large amounts of student loans, didn't necessarily love her job when she was working with us initially. Um, you know, what was uncovered in her scripture plan was she had this passion for horseback riding. And I'm like,
Mm.
you have to do this. Like, this is obviously a passion. When you talk about it, you're glowing. And she's like, oh, but like credit card debt and I have to work more and my student loans. And you fast forward today, the loans are forgiven. She's left that hospital system. She's working in industry now. She loves her job, her flexibility, better money. Credit cards are gone. She has Pickles the horse. She moved from
Let's
one part of
go.
Florida to another to be closer to like the National Equestrian
Let's
Center.
go.
So like, that was the big, and then that was the big things. And then when I talked to her yesterday, her other big thing was she wanted to do an African safari with her mom, which she booked early September, right? She's doing it. And she was one of these people where I was talking about like 7-figure pharmacists. She's like, yeah, right, Tim, like that's made up. But we looked at her portfolio. Again, this is not indicative of like future performance, but her IRAs that were managing grew $100,000 year over year.
Mhm.
And she's like, oh, okay. Like I'm starting to get it, but like super pumped up about like these trips and like the passion, things like that. So like we talk about ROI, like we can see her net worth and her investments growing. Like that's happened. But if you were to say like, what are maybe some of the things that are better about the life plan that we've built out that's supported by the financial plan, or these passions of like
Yeah.
this once in a lifetime trip, the fact that she's making it happen with her, her with showing and horseback riding and things like that. So And again, like, I think this can be harder with 2 like, with 2 people, to go back to the couples, right? And, I think the
Mhm.
way that Shay and I do it in terms of rank ordering and talking through things like that, I think the help of a financial planner goes a long, long way, because there's different dynamics in different couples. There's some people
Mhm.
that are a bulldozer, some people that, are more timid, and I think bringing to light both partners' contributions and viewpoints and what their passion are, is that's what's gonna, like, save the financial planning profession from the robots. It's
Yes,
those types
totally.
of engagements and, that type
Mhm.
of care and about our clients and what we're doing. It's not some of these other things, right? Like
Mhm.
investing or whatever. Those things are gonna eventually be, everything's gonna be by robots. But, um I think it's important. Again, it's really hard to do this by yourself. It's even harder to do it, with a partner that has a different, value
Yeah.
structure. And I think making sure that you're rowing that boat in the same direction is vital. Or you get it's passive aggressive, or you
Mhm.
bury things down deep, and you hold on to them, and it's not productive either.
Tim, perhaps obvious, but I'd like to wrap up here, and I think it needs to be said knowing that many of our listeners might be the nerd in their relationship, right?
Yeah.
And if one person is taking the lead, and if that's you, which is very common that you might have one person kind of take the lead, it's critical that the other person, the other party is informed, right? Delegation does not equal uninformed. And I think this is where something like a third party can be a really valuable asset. This is where making sure you have periodic meetings. You talked about that earlier in the show, making sure you've got good systems and documents like legacy folders. We've talked about that on the show before. And it reminds me back to an episode 4 years ago. We'll link to this episode in the show notes. One I often reference back to with Michelle Cooper, who wrote a book, I've Still Got Me, A Widow's Journey to Love, Happiness, and Financial Independence. And during the show, she shared her personal story of after losing her husband to suicide and realizing shortly after his death that despite herself being an attorney and working in the financial industry for years, she was out of the loop of their family finances and was left to navigate everything while also grieving the loss of her husband. And, again, if one person's taking the lead and that function works great, but what are the systems? What's the third party solution? What are the conversations that need to be happening to make sure that both people are informed in that process?
Yeah, so important, Tim. And like I said, I think the best results are when you have two engaged parties most of the
Yeah.
time, that more or less take our advice. I mean, we do use tools that can keep maybe an absent partner or a spotty partner up to speed, whether that's emails or recap emails or things like that. But I think the goal here, just ultimately, when you're working as a couple on your money, the goal is to win most of the time. And I think,
Mhm.
you're never going to be perfect. Some people, will have bad months or make bad decisions, um, and they feel despondent. But, I think it's really exciting and can be very relieving, especially when you have the plan in place to know, like, hey, we're okay. So we can maybe do
Mhm.
things that are outside of the comfort zone, whether it's saving or spending, whatever spectrum you fall on. And again, obviously we're super biased because we believe in what we do, and we've seen, great results from a lot of our clients. Um, but it's something that, again, we just don't do well because it's not something we have the vocabulary
Mhm.
for. So I appreciate the topic. And like we mentioned at the top, like, it's not a one size fit all. Like
That's right.
there's a lot of ways to kind of tackle the financial plan and how your finances are set up. And I think it's the same thing with the budget, trying to find what works best for you,
Mhm.
and running with that, and then kind of iterating and making sure that, you feel that all parties are kind of represented and feel good about it.
Let me end, Tim, by putting a plug in for our services 'cause I think our team just does this incredibly well.
Yeah.
Shout out to our team of certified financial planners. If you're listening thinking, "Hey, I'd like to learn more about what it would look like in working with one of YFP's fee-only certified financial planners," whether you're single, engaged, married, partner, we'd love to have that conversation. You go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. You'll see an option there to book a discovery call. Tim leads those discovery calls. Opportunity for us to learn more about your situation, learn more about our services, and ultimately determine, whether or not there's a good fit there. We'd love to have that conversation. And I think that we look at our process and our system, as I talked about briefly, in terms of making sure we have everything organized, scripting that plan, setting the vision. We just do this effectively, and I think that not only are we trying to move the net worth forward, that's an important part, but we're also looking at, beyond the numbers, what does it look like to be living a rich life, and how do we get clear on that, and how do we develop a financial plan that can support living that rich life? So, Tim, really, really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll catch everyone back here next week. Take care.